Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at allegations of corruption in the Nigerian government.
All right.
And we're going to be focusing on two prominent figures, former President Obasanjo and current President Tinubu.
Okay.
Now, it's a pretty complex situation with a lot of layers, so we're here to kind of help you cut through the noise and really just try to understand the key issues.
For sure.
And one thing that I think is so interesting about this is that these two leaders, despite being from different eras, find themselves entangled in these really similar controversies.
Yeah, it's fascinating how their own words about fighting corruption sometimes contrast so sharply with the accusations that they're facing.
Right, and how they're actually living their lives.
Exactly.
So, let's start with former President Obasanjo. He made some pretty strong statements about tackling corruption.
He did.
Yeah,
during a Zoom session called Boiling Point Arena, Obasanjo actually argued that the best way to fight corruption is by starting from the head.
Yeah.
He really emphasized that leaders have to set the example, for accountability.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
You're not leading by example, then why should anyone else follow you?
Absolutely.
And he used this really great analogy to drive home his point.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
He compared corruption to a babariga.
A babariga?
Yeah, it's a traditional Nigerian garment.
Okay.
And he was saying if you try to fold it on one side, it'll fall apart on the other.
I see.
So it's this pervasive thing.
That's such a powerful image too, right? It really gets across how difficult it can be to contain corruption.
Yeah, and how widespread it can be.
Exactly. But here's the interesting thing. While Obasanjo was advocating for this top-down accountability, he himself was facing accusations of impropriety.
Yeah, so this is where things get a little messy. Human rights lawyer Femi Falana has accused Obasanjo of not following due process when he offered to sell the Port Harcourt and Kaduna refineries to this consortium.
Oh, wow.
Led by Dangote Oil.
Dangote Oil. Okay, so what's the problem with that?
Well, I mean, first of all, Dangote Oil is huge.
Right.
And Falana is alleging that Obasanjo previously sold a 51% stake in the Port Harcourt refinery to Blue Star Oil for $561 million.
Okay.
And guess what?
What?
Blue Star Oil was a consortium that also included Dangote Oil.
Interesting. Okay.
So there's this history.
It seems like there are some connections there, potentially.
Yeah, and the controversy really stems from the fact that Obasanjo allegedly sidelined the then Vice President Atiku Abubakar, who, according to the Privatization and Commercialization Act, was actually supposed to oversee the entire privatization process.
I see. So he kind of went around the established procedures, potentially?
Potentially, yeah. And then to add another layer to this whole thing.
Okay.
President Yar'Adua later canceled the deal because he wasn't convinced that it actually served the nation's best interests.
Oh, wow. So you have all these different perspectives and actions happening here.
Right. So on one hand, you have Obasanjo saying leaders need to fight corruption.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have these accusations of him potentially bypassing legal procedures for privatization.
Yeah, it definitely raises questions about the consistency of his actions.
It does. It really highlights how complex power is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how even those who speak out against corruption, can be accused of engaging in practices that really contradict their own pronouncements.
For sure. And it just shows that we need to be cautious about taking anyone's words at face value. We need to look at their actions as well.
Yeah, exactly. Actions speak louder than words. Yeah, and it's scary to see how the government's actually reacting to these protests because it almost feels like they're trying to silence dissent rather than actually addressing the root cause of all this unrest.
Yeah.
But going back to the OCCRP,
right,
the organization that actually put Tinubu on their most corrupt list, I think their work is really fascinating.
It is. They play a crucial role in holding powerful figures accountable, and they do that by just shedding light on these often hidden networks of corruption.
Yeah, and it's not easy work.
Not at all. Their investigations involve meticulous data analysis, cross-border collaboration, and they often put themselves in quite dangerous situations by challenging those in power.
So it's investigative journalism, but on a global scale.
Pretty much. And
they're digging deep to uncover these stories. And what I thought was really interesting is that Obasanjo and Tinubu, despite facing all these serious allegations, they've also been labeled as fly presidents.
Oh, yeah.
What does that even mean?
That's a term that's used to describe leaders who prioritize personal luxury and extravagance while their citizens are struggling with economic hardship.
So is it like they're not necessarily stealing from public coffers?
Right. It's not always direct financial impropriety.
But it's a corruption of priority.
Exactly. It's a form of moral corruption, if you will.
Okay.
Where their lavish lifestyle just doesn't match the reality that most people are living in.
And the YouTube video we mentioned earlier highlights this with Kenyan President William Ruto.
Oh, right.
They said he spent over $1 million on receptions and hospitality in his first 6 months.
Wow. And just think about how much good that money could have done for the people of Kenya.
Exactly. And then there's Tinubu facing all this backlash for removing fuel subsidies.
Right.
Which has led to increased inflation and fuel scarcity.
And those things really hit ordinary Nigerians the hardest.
Yeah, so it's this crazy contrast where these leaders are, jet-setting, enjoying this really luxurious lifestyle.
Yeah.
While their people are, struggling to just afford basic necessities.
Yeah, it really creates this sense of resentment.
It does.
Yeah.
It makes it feel like the leaders are so out of touch.
Yeah, and it just erodes trust in the government.
And it can lead to, social and political instability.
Absolutely. It's a dangerous pattern.
And this isn't just a Nigerian problem, is it?
No, not at all. We see this fly president phenomenon in other countries, too, where leaders are more concerned with projecting an image of power and wealth than actually addressing the needs of their people.
So what does this say about the problem of corruption globally?
It raises some serious questions about the accountability of leaders and whether our democratic systems are actually equipped to address these imbalances.
And speaking of accountability, we've talked a lot about the allegations against Obasanjo and Tinubu.
We have.
But what does this all say about the broader problem of corruption in Nigeria?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that corruption in Nigeria is often described as endemic.
Endemic. That sounds pretty serious.
It is. It means that corruption is deeply rooted in the political culture and the institutions themselves.
So it's not just about a few bad apples.
No, it's much more systemic than that.
So what are some of the factors that contribute to this widespread corruption?
Well, there are many, and they're all interconnected, but one major issue is a weak rule of law, meaning that the laws aren't consistently and impartially enforced.
So it's not that there aren't laws against corruption, it's just that they're not really followed.
Exactly, and there's often this lack of political will to actually go after powerful individuals.
Especially if they have connections.
Exactly.
So it creates this sense of impunity where these powerful people believe they can act without any consequences.
Exactly, and that further erodes public trust in the system.
What about transparency?
A lack of transparency plays a huge role, too, when there's limited access to information about government activities and finances.
It makes it so much easier for corrupt practices to go undetected.
For sure. It's like they're operating in the shadows.
So we need more than just catching these corrupt officials after the fact.
We do. We need to create a system that makes it much more difficult for corruption to happen in the first place.
And transparency helps with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When things are open to public scrutiny, there's less incentive to engage in corrupt practices.
Because then citizens can actually hold their leaders accountable.
Exactly. And it ensures that public resources are being used for their intended purpose.
But transparency alone isn't enough.
No, we also need strong anti-corruption institutions that can actually investigate and prosecute corruption.
And those institutions have to be independent.
Absolutely. They need to be free from any political influence, and they have to be equipped with the resources and expertise to really tackle corruption effectively.
So they can investigate without fear of reprisal.
Exactly. And they need to be able to bring those found guilty to justice no matter who they are or what connections they have.
So it sounds like tackling corruption in Nigeria requires this multi-pronged approach.
It does. We need to strengthen the rule of law, promote transparency, and empower these independent anti-corruption bodies.
It's a complex problem.
It is. But it's one that Nigeria must confront if it wants to build a better future for its citizens.
And what about the role of everyday Nigerians in this fight?
Well, they have a crucial role to play.
But it can feel overwhelming, right?
It can. It's a huge systemic problem, but change often starts at the grassroots level.
It's like we've outlined this massive problem.
Yeah.
Where do everyday people even begin to make a difference when it's so deeply ingrained?
It can feel a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
But change really does start from the bottom up at the grassroots level. Citizens have a crucial role to play in demanding accountability and pushing for those reforms.
So what can they actually do?
Well, one of the most powerful things is awareness.
Okay.
Talk about these issues, share information online, engage in constructive dialogue about how corruption is actually impacting Nigerian society.
So it's like, don't let it be the elephant in the room that no one's addressing.
Exactly. Because when people are informed and they're engaged, they're more likely to demand action from their leaders.
That makes sense.
And, there are all these organizations out there that are working tirelessly to combat corruption in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Supporting those organizations, whether it's through volunteering donations or simply amplifying their message, can really make a difference.
So finding those ways to actively participate in the fight?
Yeah.
Rather than just being passive observers.
Absolutely. And another crucial aspect is holding leaders accountable.
How do you do that?
Well, don't be afraid to question your elected officials, demand transparency in government operations, and challenge decisions that seem suspicious or only benefit a select few.
So like exercising those democratic rights.
Exactly. And it's also really important to report corruption when you see it.
Yeah.
Whether it's a minor bribe or a major scandal, speaking up can help break that cycle of impunity.
But that can be scary.
It can be.
Especially if you're worried about retaliation.
I understand that, but there are ways to report corruption anonymously.
Okay.
And remember, every single time someone speaks out, it contributes to this larger movement for change.
It shows that people are not putting up with it anymore.
Exactly. It's about shifting the culture so that corruption is no longer seen as inevitable or acceptable.
Yeah.
And that starts with each individual refusing to participate in those practices, no matter how small.
Leading by example.
Yes. Demonstrating that integrity matters.
Even in those small everyday interactions.
Absolutely. And then, of course, we need to educate future generations about the importance of ethics and good governance. If we can instill these values in young people, we can help to break that cycle of corruption and create a better future for Nigeria.
It sounds like a long road.
It is. It's definitely a complex challenge, but I don't think it's insurmountable. With persistent effort, a real commitment to transparency, and active citizenship, Nigeria can move towards a future where corruption isn't just an accepted part of life.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on.
I agree.
It's been a deep dive.
It has.
But hopefully our listeners come away from this understanding the seriousness of the problem, but also realizing that change is possible.
Absolutely.
So to our listeners, stay informed, stay engaged, and don't underestimate the power of your voice in the fight against corruption. Until next time, keep diving deep.